right, this video is going to get a lot of people mad, and I don't think there's really any way around that. So today we've got to talk about AI in Magic the Gathering, and to do that we've got to have a pretty consistent conversation about what AI is, and we've got to have a conversation about what its uses could actually be. And I'm going to go ahead and throw my hand on the ground, poison the well right now. I fucking hate this technology. I do not like it at all. I think that it is endlessly derivative, but not in a way that gives homage to other works or artists, but in a way that, while not being strictly theft, has certainly been used without the consent of creators both in literature and in graphical form. I also think that as a technology, it actively makes us stupider as a race of humans. And I'm not saying that without any actual backing. We actually do have some studies that have been done on AI, ChatGPT specifically, on the accumulation of what's called cognitive debt when using the AI as an assistant for writing essays. And, well, writing essays may seem like a narrow niche task, but that is a task that is used as a placeholder, effectively, for many other tasks. After all, what's the difference between, hey, ChatGPT, write me this essay, versus, hey, ChatGPT, write me X thing, write me how to respond to my wife when she's angry, write me a recipe for, you know, a neat bolognese. Now, I'm not going to go over an entire 206-page study with you. That would be very, very boring, and only for the most completely enfranchised people in this particular space of conversation. Hell, I know for a fact that I'm not personally going to be reading the entire thing because I'm, quite frankly, too stupid to actually read the entire thing and recognize everything that I'm looking at. The part that interests me is right here, the fact that large language models tend to undeniably reduce the friction involved in answering participants' questions compared to the search engine. However, this convenience came at a cognitive cost, diminishing users' inclination to critically evaluate the LLM's output or, quote, opinions, also known as probabilistic answers based on their training datasets. This highlights a concerning evolution of the echo chamber effect. Rather than it disappearing, it has adapted to shape user experience through algorithmically curated content. What is ranked as top is ultimately influenced by the priorities of the LLM's shareholders. So what does that all mean? Obviously, it's a TLDR at the end of a very long research paper, but it effectively means that we have previous studies on the use of search engines and how those give us a cognitive shortcut, and that was causing people to run into problems with their brains. Not major problems, just issues that happen when you shortcut everything. Instead of having to figure out a problem, you could just Google a problem and then look at what comes up from there. And if you don't actually apply that knowledge to anything, you just kind of internalize it, or in many cases didn't. When it comes to large language models, well, that got a little worse because now the information was not being thrown to you by, throwing you an article and you having to go and read it yourself. Now it's whatever the AI soup wanted to poop out, and that information can be really, really drastically different depending on what prompts you used, depending on what the shareholders wanted you to see, depending on what prompts you gave the AI previously, because large language models do learn by you inputting data into them as much as they learn by having training data that they've trained on. All this means is that as people develop their opinions around AI, using things like AI to help develop those opinions is ultimately going to lead them into a far more extremist version of whatever their views would be. The AI tends to not really care about nuance as much as it cares about curating an experience that a user is going to want to come back to. There is a note here, though, that longer studies are going to need to be done in order to figure out what the long-term impact of this is going to be. Now, bear in mind, this is only for large language models. What about generative AI? So we do need to recognize that all large language models are in fact a form of generative AI. They are a nested hierarchy. Large language models specifically try to create text-only outputs, whereas generative AI will create a lot of different outputs. And one of these outputs is images. And if we are to assume that the kind of technology and the kind of side effects that happen when we have less cognitive load are happening on the essay writing end of AI, then I would assume they are also happening on the artistic side of AI. The more of these shortcuts you start to use, the less of the actual base foundational skills you start to exemplify. However, that leads us, now that we've done all this 5 minutes of prompting so that I know that we're going to have a good faith version of this conversation, that all leads us to Toph, hard-headed teacher. Now, mechanically, she's interesting. Enter, discard a card, return an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. That's really cool to me. It's a red version of an Archaeomancer effect. And if you cast a spell, you get to Earthbend, and if that spell's a lesson, then you get to add counters onto that land. And Earthbending allows you to grab a land and turn it into a creature with haste that has a 1/1 counter. If that land happens to die, you explore, which gives you a chance at grabbing another land. Mechanically, she's cool, and I'll probably end up making a deck around her with, like, Tanook as the lieutenant or something. Who knows? But the most interesting part about this image is not the actual text box down here, it's the image up here. And this image has Magic the Gathering players over on Twitter and Blue Sky and Reddit and basically everywhere, well, kind of fucking pissed. So first I'll ask you, does anything in this image look weird? I'd say that the fist looks a little weird, maybe some of the lighting decisions look a little weird, but I'm also not a professional artist, so I have no idea what else is in this picture to actually allow the lighting to operate the way that it does. But if we look down to the artist, Ruwen Liu, then we might be able to find some information about this artist that would lead us in a direction. Now, before we go any further, I want to go ahead and say that the idea of stolen art in Magic the Gathering is something we've already seen before. If you remember the Trouble in Pairs controversy from before, effectively, there's this card called Trouble in Pairs, and several aspects of the card were actually stolen from other different literary works. The cover arts of these different, young adult or sci-fi novels were used to composite together the image of Trouble in Pairs. A majority of the artwork itself was then touched up a little bit later to make things blend a little bit better, but it did not mean that the artwork was created by the artist who was commissioned to make the art. The artwork was all effectively stolen from several other graphical artists. So I give you that information to also point out that Magic the Gathering players are already primed not to trust Wizards of the Coast and not to trust the art team specifically when it comes to getting art into Magic the Gathering now. We've already been burned as a community. So when we're also in the exact same set getting absolutely garbage artwork like what's shown on Standstill, where the screen is just incredibly blurry because the image was taken from a show that was shown on CRT TVs in 480p and then barely even touched up in order to go into an assets package that was then sent out not just to Wizards of the Coast, but also to Bushiroad, who makes Weiss Schwarz. If you'd like any evidence for that, then thank Distraction Makers for showing me this piece, and they probably credited somebody else when they figured it out. But here we have the Toph Blind Bandit card from Weiss Schwarz, and then we have the Earth Rumble Triumph, or the Return of the Wild Speaker card from Magic the Gathering. So again, I'm showing you all of this to show you that well for Magic players has been pretty thoroughly poisoned. Not only are so many of the cards that are shown here just really bad screenshots, with Cruel Tutor being the one that got memed on the absolute hardest. Hell, I made fun of it in my YouTube short. And we can see that those exact screenshots, literally the exact frames, are basically just an asset dump that was given to us by, but not by Wizards of the Coast, but by the company Viacom that actually owns Avatar. So between asset reuse that's not really flavorful to either Magic or Avatar, and between previous instances of Magic the Gathering being a game that has burned its players that want to see actual artists do actual art for the game, we've just seen that quality control has gone out the window. So all of that, and also Magic players being primed against AI art, as they should, because AI art isn't actually art. It is a thing that is generating an image that might be pleasing to look at, but you literally ask none of the questions that you would ask when it comes to artwork when you look at that image. Why did an artist do this brushstroke the way that they did? Doesn't fucking matter. It was made by ones and zeros. That said, all of that priming out of the way is there so that when we look at Ruwen Liu, you can kind of understand why people, or Ruwen Liu, you can understand why people are trepidatious. So, I'm going to read this out to you, and in the comment section, let me know what you think, but understand there is another side to this coin we're going to go to. So Ruwen is co-founder of Spellbrush, a startup focused on building the next generation of AI-powered games. In collaboration with Midjourney, Spellbrush released Niji Journey, a state-of-the-art AI that draws custom anime illustrations. Ruwen is also the owner of the infamous Waifu Labs project, as she directed Aeromancer, the world's first commercial video game using fully generative AI art. In her free time, Ruwen is also a freelance illustrator at Magic the Gathering. So, a couple of things here that I want to go ahead and state. One, yes, technically you are a freelance illustrator that made stuff for Magic the Gathering, but the only illustration that we have seen as viewers that you have done is this Toph, and all of your, acumen that we see that you are publicly stating is all AI generated stuff. So we're looking to Waifu Labs a little bit. It says that it's a state-of-the-art AI that draws custom anime portraits just for you. This machine learning artist figures out your preferences and creates a perfect character illustration in 4 easy steps. It sounds like magic, and that's because it is, and it's totally free to use. Okay. So I already have a huge problem with a lot of the language that's being used here, because it's not an artist, it's a machine. And art is one of the most uniquely human things that we have. And when we start trusting a machine to start doing these uniquely human things instead of what we should be using machines for, which is the boring, agitating, and sometimes dangerous tasks, which is why factories became more safe as time goes on, when we start using AI to do the most fundamentally human parts of our experience instead of the harder tasks that are dangerous to us, I feel like eventually we start to lose that aspect of our humanity, because we start to not value the creative process that we actually can use. That's why every art asset that's on this channel is something that I have commissioned from an artist. That said, let's see if we can create my character with this. I'm not 100% certain we'll be able to, because, well, there is an iterative process behind how my character came to be. I had a male avatar originally. I made Hearthstone content. That avatar was used for that content. It was based off of Thrall from World of Warcraft. And then after a while, I started getting gender-bent fan art all the time, and so I got a VTuber avatar that was based off the gender-bent fan art, and then I wanted to move away from the VTuber for this channel, so I got the artist who originally made my first VTuber avatar, like 8 avatars ago, to make me a PNG tuber avatar that would be more in line with what this channel is supposed to be. People ask about that thing in the comment section a bunch. I wanted to go ahead and throw that lore dump in here. Let's see if we can actually make my character. So using a base, none of this looks like it would actually be good for making my character, but I guess we'll use this right here because the hair looks at least similar enough, kind of. Let's go with this. Generating characters. Okay, and now we're gonna go with, say, this one. It's just getting the color palette. We're going to go with the browns because that is my color palette. And then, okay, we are getting maybe a little closer. Maybe we do this one here. And, okay. And at this point, we'll do that one. Complete. Looks nothing like my character, but I guess if somebody wants to use it as a profile picture, then that is their prerogative, and that's what it does. Okay, not a very impressive technology, all things considered. But there is something that is impressive that I want to show you guys, and I think this is where we start to run into problems. because I can rag on the AI technology because it is garbage. That is something that I am perfectly fine just completely shitting on. But here, I want you to see the works of Ruwen Liu, the artist. While I can make every single observation and every dicking down argument that I can about AI, generative AI, what it does to the industry, what it ruins about the human experience, all of that fun stuff, and there's even further I can go than that, just not on this channel. What I can say is that when I look at her artwork that is not AI generated, I see a lot of fucking beauty. Holy shit, everything in here looks fantastic. And I'm specifically looking at the stuff from 6 and 7 years ago. This is the stuff that she was making by hand well before generative AI got to the point where it could produce images looking even 1/10 as robust as what we see here. This is from years ago. And if we scroll all the way up, we can even see like her sketchbook being used for several images here. And we can see her artwork improve over time drastically. As things go on, these bits of the human experience start to become more well realized. And eventually we get to images like this Miku or this Freerin here. And I want to use these images to show you something. While yes, the Waifu Labs project is a hot garbage idea, I'm sorry, I do not think that we should be promoting AI art in any of its forms. That said, if we focus entirely on the AI part of this, then we're ignoring the artist that has made this character. Now, I've seen a ton of people saying that they have definitive proof that this Toph is AI. They have definitive proof that this is an AI-generated image. But the thing is, this image is entirely consistent with the artwork style that we see in all of her other work. Again, going back several years, almost up to a decade away, that Toph would not feel entirely out of place next to this Yuna. They do not feel like they are broken out of two different artistic universes. They have the consistency that you typically lack when you're looking at AI generation. The art for Toph looks like she did it by hand. It looks like something that she 100% put her time, heart, and soul into. And I think that's something that should be celebrated. We should not, as a community, get super angry at somebody simply for using a tool that has become commonplace in modern society. That tool is entirely harmful. That tool causes objective harm. That tool strips away essential parts of the human experience. Absolutely. Every single argument about that is valid. But so does Walmart. Like, ultimately, we look for convenience, and that is an error that makes many of us human. We look for convenience. And if somebody just happens to be working on those projects, that does not inherently poison the other work that they do, which is beautiful. I can be entirely against the AI side of this easily. That's not hard to do. I pay the artists who work on stuff for my channel money for a reason. And I wanted to give another example of this that I saw while combing around stuff for here. Just kind of an idea of how poisoned our brains are in regards to this, where I 100% believe that being anti-AI is the right side to be on. At the same time, I feel like there is an appropriate use of that energy and an inappropriate use of that energy. So we have a post here that I've cropped out because I don't want harassment going to any of the creators involved or any of the people involved in these posts. If you go and seek them out, that is your own business, but I'm imploring you not to fucking do that because I don't want you to be a goddamn animal. So, person says here that they have a strict serenade, and they love it, and they like the cards so much that they started making tokens with Grok, another generative AI, that they can hand out, so they can use that to hand out the perfect token for any card that they turn into an owl. So like if they use the owl on a Kappa Cannoneer, suddenly boom, owled Kappa Cannoneer. Now this owled Ragavan here. Now, could you do all this with Photoshop? Absolutely. And I would have preferred that somebody did that with an actual tool that does not yank away from everybody else's shit. But even Photoshop has started adding generative AI into its program, so at this point, it's just unavoidable until that fucking bubble pops, I guess. That said, the responses to this kind of confused me. Responses like, if you counter my Ral Monsoon Sage with a strict serenade and hand me a fucking AI slot token, I am standing up and yelling in the store that this guy came here to meet a miner. Now, there are two sides to this. One side is the internet is a place where we hyperbolize things. Do I believe that this person would actually stand up and call somebody not just a pedophile, but a full-on child predator who is actively about to harm somebody? Would I say... or would I believe that they would stand up and do that? No. No, I think most of us are far more reasonable than that as human beings. But on the internet, people say all kinds of shit. And it's perfectly reasonable for somebody to read this and assume that somebody would, in fact, do that. Now, even though you're on, again, what I think is the objectively correct side of this conversation, the way that you're communicating here, the things that you are saying are, I would commit a type of defamation and I would fraudulently harm somebody's life, get them banned from a store, ruin everything that they are, and traumatize them because they used a large language model and made a token. And then handed that token to you because they thought it would be funny. I do not want an AI-generated piece of shit handed to me either, but I also don't think this is an appropriate response. And there were other responses from this as well, saying, if you pass me an AI-generated token in a game, I am throwing it across the room. And again, this is somebody saying, hey, I would willingly destroy your property because you handed it to me in a funny, joking, jesting manner. And again, do I think that somebody would actually do this? No, because I've seen people walk in with like fully AI-generated waifu decks where there's 11 toes on the goddamn characters, but they don't care because the tits are ginormous. I've seen people bring that shit in and how uncomfortable it makes other people at the table, but I still don't see anybody do this stuff. And again, two sides of every story here. There is always the internet want to hyperbolize things. You can't take what somebody says 100% seriously all the time, because when we are speaking out into the ether and there's no chance of there being repercussion, people will say some heinous shit even if they don't actually mean it. But on the other hand, if you are on the objectively right side of a conversation, then maybe don't say things that make it easier to throw you under the bus and say that you're on the wrong side of the conversation. Maybe not. I also ultimately want to say this. I do not know who Ruwen Liu is. I did research into her only a little bit, and research into AI only a little bit, and research into the way that Magic players have been responding to the AI-generated question in Magic only a little bit, and made my opinions that way. I'm sure with more research, maybe I would find myself on a different side of this conversation. Or maybe I would find myself more enfranchised in the side that I'm in right now, which is, this is a person that we should not look at as if they are a poisoned fucking person. If somebody is using an AI tool and they use that tool to figure out a recipe that they're cooking, are you going to never go to that person's house and never eat any of their cooking simply because they had the audacity to type into ChatGPT, how do I make a bolognese? I don't think that that's fair to anybody, and it aims our energy and ire at the wrong people. Ultimately, if we are worried about AI replacing artists, which I am worried about corporations doing that, because corporations are not our friends, and they will always do what they can to try to cut out the middleman, or try to cut as many corners as possible to make as much money as possible. I am of the opinion that if that is your enemy, if your enemy in your mind is the corporation that is cutting away jobs from artists, then your enemies are not the people on the ground that are using the tools that have been thrown at them, almost even forced onto them at this point, because that's what's been happening with Google Gemini. That's what's been happening with OpenAI. That's what's been happening with basically every single AI program. Is it's been jammed into everything that you don't want it jammed into, and yet you still have to have a phone, and so you still end up having that shit. Aiming your energy at the individual people using the tech, as opposed to aiming it at the people developing, distributing, and failing to profit off the tech, because that's an entirely different conversation for a different channel. I think you should be aiming that energy there. I think the energy should be aimed at Google, should be aimed at OpenAI, should be aimed at politicians that don't regulate those people, should be aimed at Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast if, in fact, this does prove to be AI artwork for not doing their due diligence during the hiring process. Those are the places to aim that energy, not at random fucking people making tokens, not at people who, hey, may have been hired by Wizards to make a thing, but simply because somebody has a history of using a tool, you used that as definitive proof that the person has no artistic skills and has not made anything at all, when the proof is quite literally available for all to see, going back almost a decade. I feel like it's entirely unfair as a community for us to do this kind of witch hunting when there is not blood in the water that points us where we need to go. There's absolutely blood in the water saying that Wizards will cut corners, saying that Wizards will hire artists that have stolen artwork until they learn, or at least it becomes publicly available, that the artwork was stolen from other areas. There's blood in the water, and it makes perfect sense to me why people would try to figure out where that blood leads. But to say conclusively that you know where it leads when you haven't looked into it at all and are going entirely off of a gut feeling and vibes is equally unfair. That's my take. That's where I'm at with all of this. That Toph, I do not think is AI generated. The community backlash to it, I think, is entirely understandable, given the history that Wizards has had with us as players. And given the history that Viacom has with using its assets, I think it makes sense that people are having this reaction. But I also think it's a good idea for us to get maybe a little more appropriate with the reactions we are having, personally. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Maybe I'm wrong in all this. Maybe I'm completely off base. But I want to know y'all's thoughts. That said, I thank you very much for watching this video, and I look forward to the, 1,000 people that unsubscribe from here for my take, because I don't know. I have faith in humanity, kind of, and I have faith in the Magic the Gathering community, kind of. That said, as always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.